We start first today with the Admiral tugboat. The Admiral was built as the W.H. Meyer, which was later renamed Admiral in 1942 during the time of the vessel's rebuilding. The Admiral was a steel propeller tugboat. She was built by the Shipbuilding Company of Manitowoc, Wisconsin in 1907. She had a gross registered tonnage of 130 tons, and she was operated at the time by the Cleveland Tankers, Incorporated. Next, we start with the barge, named the Cleveco, or the Clevco. I'm going to call it the Clevco. The Clevco had numerous other names. Under her original owners, she was first named C.O. & Co., number 85, then renamed to S.T. & Co. in 1916, followed by Scone, or Scani, 85 in 1918, and then Gotham 85 in 1930. Finally, in 1940, she finally received her last name, the Clevco. She was originally built as a sail barge, and was eventually operated as a steel tanker with no means of motivation other than being towed by a tugboat. She had a gross registered tonnage of 2,441 tons, and her cargo was typically fuel oil, or crude oil. She was built in 1913 by the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorain, Ohio. On Tuesday afternoon, December 1st, 1942, the tugboat Admiral towed the tanker barge Clevco into Toledo Harbor. She was pulling her down the Maumee River into Lake Erie. This was a 96-mile run along the south shore of the lake for Cleveland. The tanker barge Clevco held 1 million gallons of crude oil. The weather was pretty fair for early December, and there was nothing forecasted. On throughout the long night, the Admiral churned her way eastward. However, the wind began to roll up, and occasionally began sending waves, breaking against the sides of the tug and the barge. Around midnight, the force of a storm grew greater. The thermometer suddenly dropped, and at around exactly midnight it stood at exactly the freezing mark, and by early morning it was registered 24 degrees. Around 4 in the morning, when the lookout on the Clevco came into the wheelhouse, he reported that the tow line connecting to the barge, the Admiral, was not where it should be. It did appear to be coming up from the bottom of the lake instead of its normal position as they were underway. The heading of the Clevco had stopped, and nothing could be seen of the lights from the Admiral in front of the Clevco. Captain William H. Smith of the barge held a meeting with his officers. His brother, Edwin S. Smith, was the first mate. They began discussing what had happened to the Admiral, and they decided that she had capsized or foundered and was at the very moment lying on the bottom of Lake Erie. However, no one aboard the Clevco had actually seen the accident. It was a tragic moment for the men on the tanker barge. If their guess was true that the Admiral had sunk, then that meant 14 of their fellow sailors had perished. The Clevco, being a barge, was now left without propulsion power, and she herself was in a predicament, especially being in the storm that was beginning to rise to greater and greater risks. Captain Smith, the 62-year-old skipper, coming from a long line of lakemen, turned on his radio and telephoned and reported his plight to the shore connections. He asked that other tugboats be sent at once to bring in his barge. The captain gave his location, that he was about 15 miles off of Avon Point. He said that his vessel was in no immediate danger, but needed a tug promptly, and that his situation was not good due to the increasing wind, waves, and cold. 2 tugboats, the California and the Pennsylvania, of the Great Lakes towing fleet left Cleveland Harbor to assist the Clevco. They immediately headed towards the spot indicated in Captain Smith's report. Upon reaching the site, the 2 tugs were unable to locate any sign of the Clevco, and the storm had definitely increased in intensity. Also, in the meantime, it was now a swirling great mass of snow over the surface of the lake, which had come upon it. The severe and sudden cold had caused a fog or a steam-like form to form over the surface of the lake, along with the swirling of snow made visibility almost impossible. This condition grew worse as the day went on. Evidently, the Clevco had let go of both her anchors after cutting loose from the sunken Admiral. But both anchors were not sufficient to hold the heavy-laden tanker in the gale that was blowing. She continued to drift eastward away from the shoreline. Many other ships joined in the hunt for the Clevco, both on the lake and in the air. Some had reported spotting her for a short time, only again to lose her amongst the snow and blowing wind. The ships that were out searching for the Clevco were battered about and stung by cold winds and high seas. The Coast Guard had sent out all available boats, and the cutter Ossipee, if I'm saying that correctly, also joined the search. The commander of the Ossipee contacted Captain Smith of the Clevco by telephone, and details of the proposed rescue were discussed. After a search with no luck off of the waters of Avon Point, the rescue craft decided that the information was incorrect and requested that Captain Smith give better coordinates of his ship. The Clevco's position was then established as 10 miles north of West Cleveland Light. A lot of valuable time and energy had now been lost in its search, and the Ossipee carried on the search alone, being the largest vessel in the rescue fleet. Smaller Coast Guard boats were forced to return, however, to the shore. The wind howled over the lake at 35 miles an hour, and the thermometer hovered around 14 degrees at noon on Wednesday, the 2nd of December. At around 1:30 in the afternoon, the officers of the Ossipee managed to get a glimpse of the Clevco, but she very quickly again was lost and out of sight. They circled the spot for hours, hoping to catch another glimpse of her. At about 2, they saw her again, but only for a moment, and then she disappeared. Contact between the Ossipee and the Clevco was maintained, however. At first, Captain Smith said that his crew were no longer in danger and would prefer not to leave their ship. However, subsequent messages indicated that the storm was beginning to wreak havoc upon the ship, and that the men considered their situation now dangerous. The final calls asked that they be taken off the Clevco. By 3:30, a message was received stating that the tanker was taking in water, and it was feared that this would kill the ship's generators. This would put the radio and telephone out, also the entire electrical system on the tanker. The wind on Lake Erie then began to increase to a velocity of 60 miles an hour, with occasional gusts of around 70. The final message of the Clevco came in at around 4:40 that afternoon. The Ossipee's commander radioed to have the crew of the tanker pump oil onto the water, hoping to thereby calm the surface and possibly make a slick, which which might help them in locating the Clevco. However, no reply came back. The Ossipee remained at the scene on Wild Lake Erie at that time, and all night. The ship took a horrible pounding in the darkness as the storm had intensified into a full gale with waves over 18 to 25 feet high, and visibility was at zero. Finally, daybreak came, and with the men aboard the Ossipee, they were finally able to see two bodies floating alongside the ship, which they managed to recover and bring aboard. The bodies were covered with heavy oil and wore life belts from the Clevco. The Ossipee gave up the vigil at nightfall. Shrouded completely in a thick layer of ice, she limped into the harbor of Fairport, Ohio, after about 36 hours of continuous searching duty. After clearing the heavy, thick layer of ice on the Ossipee, she once again steamed out onto Lake Erie, searching for other bodies of the crew of the lost tanker barge. It is surmised that the Clevco went down in the darkness of Thursday morning, December 3rd. The tanker had taken the lives of her entire crew of 18 men down with her. Only an oily slick was left on the surface of Lake Erie to also mark the spot where she had went down. For several days, Coast Guard motor lifeboats, the cutter Ossipee, and Coast Guard auxiliary vessels, and other private crafts owned by citizens, along with the tanker Comet, and several planes, continued to search for bodies of not only the Clevco, but the Admiral as well. However, some are still believed to be within the cabin walls of both vessels, trapped down there as their permanent graves. The wreck of the Admiral was located in 1969 by Cleveland commercial diver George Walton. Walton had recovered the tug's bell and other artifacts from it, yet he would not give up the ship's location. Unfortunately, many artifacts have indeed been removed from the tug and remain in private collections. Other artifacts, including the ship's bell, now can be viewed at the Great Lakes Historical Society in Vermillion, Ohio. Divers report that prior to the invasion of the zebra mussels in Lake Erie in 1988, the name Admiral is, however, clearly visible on the side of the bow. And today, the name has been obscured so much by zebra mussels and the entire tug as well. The Clevco lies upside down in Lake Erie's mud and silt covered bottom, 78 feet of water, and approximately 14 miles north of Euclid, Ohio. In total, 32 men lost their lives, 14 on the tug Admiral and 18 on the Clevco. It is noted here that the Clevco was found overturned in Lake Erie. However, this was only for a little while before she sank again beneath the waters of Lake Erie. This was during the rescue attempts to try and find more crew members from both ships. What exactly happened to the tugboat Admiral and the tow barge Clevco? From what I could read from reports, the weather was fair and the water was calm, and they didn't have any signs of a storm brewing up, November gale or in December. But wow, from other things that I could find, that the tug Admiral had become covered in ice a lot, especially during the waves coming over and over here again, and that must have overloaded her and sent her to the bottom of Lake Erie. That must have been a sight for the Clevco to come up to especially their line, come up to the tow barge line leading into the water, and knowing that that's where the tug Admiral was at. That must have been something to see. And then still up on the surface, the barge not being able to go anywhere, being tossed about in that horrible storm. Good grief. And then, she finally succumbed to that and flipped over and then sank. What a very tragic story of Lake Erie. Maybe you guys know some more information about this story and would leave it in the comments below, but tell me what you guys think in the comment section down below. And that will do it for this story of Songs of the Great Lakes. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. And Yeah, definitely an interesting story, again, of these Great Lakes and their power, and not to be underestimated. So, but God bless you guys. Thank you again for joining me on this story, and I look forward to sharing the next one with you guys to come. Thank you, and God bless you.